It's a shocking case out of the mountains of North Carolina. A restaurateur, a mom, accused of the unthinkable, killing her own daughter by poisoning. She's also accused of trying to do the same to her other daughter and her boyfriend at Thanksgiving dinner. And the woman at the center of this case appears to have been a fixture of the local foodie scene for years. So why would she allegedly try to take the lives of multiple people, her own family members? All of that remains a mystery. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Not only is the woman we're talking about today accused of a bizarre, and I mean bizarre in a very horrific way, a crime of allegedly trying to poison people with wine at Thanksgiving dinner, taking the life of her own daughter, allegedly. There's another layer to this story, and it has to do with this woman and a cold case murder that had been unsolved for roughly 20 years. So there's a lot to get to in this story. And before we get to this cold case part of it, I really need to build up the suspect in this case, a woman with a very interesting background who is now at the center of a very, very scary story. Now, this story is coming out of the beautiful landscape of Western North Carolina in the area of Asheville. Now, Asheville may be a city of only about 100,000 people, but it's really a cultural hub in the South. It's a place a lot of tourists like to flock to. There's great food, there are breweries, great music. It's the type of place you can definitely go have a great weekend to hang out. And one of the people who seems to have been trying to make it as a restaurateur in Asheville was a woman named Gudrun Casper-Leinenkugel. Now, according to an article in the local paper, the Mountain Express, this was back in 2016, Gudrun, quote, and her group of managing partners began planning the Patton Public House in July 2013. And here are pictures that are still up from that restaurant. It's now closed, but this was their Instagram account. And in the article, Gudrun, the woman at the center of this case that we'll get to here in just a moment, she tells this story that she had been working since she was 13 years old, saying, quote, I owned a laundromat. I had to learn how to run the business and fix the machines. It was a good learning experience, she said. The article goes on to say that she has opened 6 restaurants and bars across the country. Now, it's unclear where those restaurants and bars were across the country. But in that article, Gudrun says that this restaurant that she was going to be opening, this public house in Asheville, it was inspired by the comfort food and beer supplied by the European public houses that she grew up with. She claims to have grown up spending time traveling between the US and Europe, between Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Germany. So the launch of this restaurant, the Patton Public House that Gudrun opened, it wasn't entirely smooth. According to WLOS TV, we found an article from around the same time as that other story from 2016 that came out about several employees quitting on the spot just a month into this restaurant opening, claiming that the restaurant wasn't paying their employees. Now, in the feature story, Gudrun said all of that was the fault of the payroll company. So as I'm bringing up these stories of the past, it is to really just help you understand this person at the center of what appears to be a very complex, very unusual, and very unique story that we're following. And at some point, it appears that there was a horrible turn that this woman, Gudrun, allegedly took. So let's talk about Thanksgiving 2025. So you have Gudrun, this restaurateur who hosted, according to prosecutors, a 12-person dinner. And the guests included members of her own family, as one would expect on Thanksgiving. And 2 of those family members were Gudrun's 2 daughters. One of them is the woman who you see here. Her name is Leila Livis. Now, Gudrun's other daughter, according to court records, is named Mia Lacey, and with her, according to police, at this dinner was her boyfriend, Richard Pegg. This is all according to court documents. Now, we don't have pictures of Mia and Richard at this time. So, according to WHNS TV in North Carolina, at this Thanksgiving dinner, Gudrun offered her guests wine, and those guests drank it. And after dinner, 3 of the guests who drank from the same bottle just started not to feel well. And it wasn't the kind of sick that you might get after having a heavy turkey dinner. This was something much, much worse. Leila had to go to the hospital. That is how bad she was feeling after having this wine. And Mia and Richard, they also felt really, really sick. Whatever Leela had ingested killed her, according to law enforcement. She died on December 1st, roughly a week after Thanksgiving. As for Richard and Mia, they appear to be very lucky to be alive based on what we've learned was allegedly in that wine on Thanksgiving. According to law enforcement, an investigation revealed that the three consumed a chemical called acetonitrile. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the EPA, describes it as a clear, colorless liquid, and it can be used as a solvent for lithium batteries. And it is not something you want to put in the human body. The agencies are very clear that this chemical, it is toxic and it can cause symptoms like headaches, nausea, and if a person consumes it, it can be fatal. This stuff is incredibly dangerous, and that is what was allegedly in this wine. So the question becomes, how could three people, daughters of the woman hosting this Thanksgiving dinner, ingest this harmful chemical that's often used with lithium batteries? Well, prosecutors at a hearing that was attended by local media say a review of Gudrun's search history provided an alleged answer to that. And very clearly, that search read, quote, "What happens if I ingest acetonitrile?" Prosecutors say that Gudrun searched that before the dinner. Now, Gudrun is facing charges for allegedly poisoning her own daughter to death. That is a murder charge, as well as trying to kill her other daughter and her boyfriend. Attempted murder charges. So she's facing charges of first-degree murder, as well as 2 counts of first-degree attempted murder and 3 counts of distribution of certain food and beverage prohibited. But we're not done yet, because those are not the only serious charges that this woman is now facing, because Gudrun is facing an additional charge of first-degree murder, and it has nothing to do with what happened less than a year ago on Thanksgiving 2025. We have the arrest warrant that accuses Gudrun of killing a man named Michael Schmidt back in 2007 in Henderson County, North Carolina, a community south of Asheville. Now, the date of Michael Schmidt's death, per the arrest warrant, the date of his alleged murder was October 29th, 2007. And according to Fox Carolina, Schmidt died in a house fire. But as deputies were investigating the alleged poisonings, they uncovered evidence that Gudrun allegedly killed Michael Schmidt nearly 20 years ago in 2007. Now, to this point, it's unclear what evidence deputies came across to make them believe that he didn't die in a house fire by accident, that he died because he was allegedly murdered. And the TV station reports that Schmidt died in the same house that Gudrun had been living in on Schmidt Terrace in Hendersonville, North Carolina. So here's a picture of Gudrun Casper-Leinenkugel making an appearance from jail for a bond hearing. A judge denied Casper-Leinenkugel's bond, and WHNS also reports that prosecutors told the court that she is being investigated for additional deaths that are currently under investigation. If found guilty, just based off the charges that she's facing right now, she could be eligible for the death penalty in North Carolina. I put Gudrun Casper-Leinenkugel's name into truthfinder.com. We did see some previous addresses come up in the state of Wisconsin, which lines up with what she said in that feature article years ago, that she had ties out of the state of North Carolina. We do see a couple aliases for her, but no real criminal history, which is certainly interesting considering what she is accused of. Now, we partner with Truthfinder for the public record searches that we do here on Law and Crime. Truthfinder saves us research time so we can focus on reporting crime, not paperwork. And you can use Truthfinder as well. You type in a name to find addresses, criminal history, and more. It's our go-to tool for checks, and it's one of the largest search services in the United States. With a subscription, you get unlimited confidential searches to check on maybe new neighbors, maybe to vet people you meet online, or find someone who you can reconnect with. You can even look up registered sex offenders nearby or do a background search on yourself. Stay informed, stay safe. Check public records with Truthfinder now at truthfinder.com/OTC. Joining us now to talk more about this case from North Carolina is criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Kristen Halkiotis. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime to kind of dive into how the law works in North Carolina for a case. You know, this one, there's a lot of layers to it. I want to start because the 2007 murder of a man named Michael Schmidt that feels like that just came out of nowhere. Not only the Thanksgiving dinner part of it from 2025, and we'll talk about that, but he reportedly died in a house fire. Like, how could investigators find evidence about, what would they need to prove to actually, I guess, find her guilty of a house fire, what they thought he died as a house fire in 2007. Now in this age, to be able to find evidence that would actually beyond a reasonable doubt convict her of something like that.
Well, first, Chris, thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate that. And to your question, the media accounts that we've seen about this investigation so far, and of course, it's incredibly new. Not that much has been released to this point, but we know that there was a search done, presumably of her home. We know there was a search done of her computers, her search history, and we'll talk about that in a minute because that looks like it's going to be some pretty damning evidence in the Thanksgiving murder case. But we don't know what, if anything, they found in her home when they searched, right? We don't know what was found on her computer, if she had other sorts of search history, if there was physical evidence in her home. We don't know what that fire marshal report was about, what they thought was a house fire back in 2007 that may corroborate things that were found in her home. We don't know if there were potentially journals, diaries, things like that. Evidence of a connection that she had to that person. So all of that remains to be seen at this point. But it would be my guess that whatever it was to tie her to it was probably found during the search of her home and or her belongings.
Yeah, and the victim in 2007, his name is Michael Schmidt, and he died according to what local media has been able to dig up about the 2007 case, he died in the home where Gudrun Casper-Leinenkugel is currently living on Schmidt Terrace in Hendersonville, North Carolina. So that is the scene where this house fire allegedly took place. Turning to Thanksgiving 2025, and the evidence that we know about at this point is that there's this very toxic chemical that can be fatal that was in the wine that was drank by the three people there. And then you have the search history where she allegedly searched, what happens if someone consumes this? You hear that on the outside and you say, this is a pretty slam dunk case. How does a defense attorney take on something like that?
Well, that is extremely strong evidence for the state, for sure. Those Google searches, I've seen plenty of cases where that pops up to bite a defendant in a really big way. I think with the defense, and it's interesting. I noticed when I was reviewing the file that she doesn't have a lawyer yet. Apparently, she has waived appointed counsel, seeking to hire her own, which is odd. Usually judges will go ahead and appoint a capital defender in a first-degree murder case here in North Carolina. And then if a defendant wants to hire an attorney, they're certainly welcome to. But in order to make sure someone's rights are preserved from the very get-go, the judge will usually go ahead and appoint someone. So it was a little bit odd that she wasn't appointed a lawyer, because it doesn't seem as if she's going to be getting out of custody anytime soon in order to be working or making money to hire a lawyer. But that being said, this is something where if I'm getting into a case like this, the first thing I'm going to do is have a mental health evaluation done, because some of the circumstances of this case are just so wild that I want to make sure to do my due diligence, cover my bases, and make sure that my client is actually in touch with reality.
Well, and that was because I did see that she waived counsel. So I'm happy you explained that, because she's going to have a probable cause hearing on the 10th. And so she has this first appearance. She's been denied bond. And then, so right now she does not have a lawyer. Is that right? And say how do we know that she is mentally fit for any of this, these proceedings, if she doesn't have a lawyer?
So at this point, we don't know that. And that court date that she's been given on February 10th for the probable cause hearing, the state has a way to get around that. So under North Carolina law, you do have to have a probable cause hearing for a felony within 15 days of being charged for the case to go to superior court. But if your case is indicted before that by the grand jury, you circumvent the probable cause hearing process and the case goes straight to superior court.
Will she, at this probable cause hearing, if she does not hire a lawyer between now and then, I mean, who is with her with her on the defense side for this hearing?
Well, at the current time, she doesn't have a lawyer. If she asks the court for a continuance because she's still trying to hire one, uh, you know, she could get a continuance. But again, I think I would be very surprised if the state didn't go ahead and just indict this very quickly.
When it comes to a search history, because it does sound very damning, that's a very specific chemical that should not be consumed by a human being. The CDC is very clear about that. And then it ends up in the wine, and then there's going to be the science there. How hard is it as a defense attorney to argue away the Google search for, because there are some, reasons with like lithium batteries that you can buy this chemical for other reasons. How difficult is it to get a jury eventually to buy that, to say, well, it was actually maybe a cleaning product or something like that. And I don't know how it ended up in the wine.
Well, things I think that counsel would be looking at would be, who else was at this dinner, right? Who else was at the dinner? Who else had access to the wine that was being consumed? Who else, if anyone, and maybe there wasn't anyone, but who else could have had access to her computer? Those are all things to take into account.
There is a line that was buried in a local media report from Fox Carolina that said that she is under investigation for other deaths that happened in North Carolina, not just Michael Schmidt in 2007 and not what happened at Thanksgiving allegedly in 2025. How might that come into play with how this plays out going forward? Because if she's going to be indicted on the Thanksgiving, and she's going to be indicted on what happened in 2007, but then there's still this open question of like, wait, how many other cases is she involved with? How could that come into play with just the timeline of how this all plays out?
Sure. I think it would certainly prolong the timeline. That's for sure. If there's all these other cases allegedly that are still under investigation at this point. However, this is not a situation where the prosecutor would be necessarily looking to try all these cases together. So, for example, the two cases that she's been charged with, even though in looking at the court file, they appear on the same warrant or charging document, they will not be able to be tried together. So the 2007 case, because it's not what we call transactionally related to the Thanksgiving case, that would have to be tried separately. Now, the multiple incidents, I believe she's charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and then also putting a substance into food or drink. Those charges would be able to be tried together because they all arose out of the same transaction or occurrence at that Thanksgiving dinner, allegedly. But that 2007 case would be tried separately.
Obviously, murder is a very, very serious charge, and we'll talk about whether the death penalty could come into play here in just a moment. But that one other charge that she has, the 3 counts related to giving a prohibited food or beverage, how serious, if someone's just charged with that, is that crime in North Carolina?
I mean, that can be a pretty serious charge, but again, it pales in comparison to what she is charged with. The murder charges,
Sure.
the attempted murder.
How likely is it that all of this is and we don't know if she's going to be charged with any other murders or other crimes related to her time in North Carolina, but you have the 2007 house fire. That's very different than a poisoning in 2025. How likely is it all of this ends up being tried together?
So I don't, this is not a situation. Certainly, all the incidents that happened at Thanksgiving allegedly would be tried together. So the murder, the 2 attempted murders, and the putting prohibited substance into food or drink would be tried together. That 2007 case would be tried separately because it's not part of that same transaction or occurrence. Now, if there are instances, let's say, for example, those other cases under investigation end up getting charged and they, if it's something similar to one of those other incidents, the state can sometimes put on what's called 404B evidence, which is evidence of similar crimes or wrongs, to show a particular plan or scheme that the defendant had to bolster a case. And so, I think if the state wanted to say, oh, we want to put on evidence of the 2007 murder within the trial of the 2025 charges, that might be a tough row to hoe because it's so far away in time, and the manner or mechanism of the crime is completely different.
And this is a morbid question, but if they believed Michael Schmidt that it wasn't a murder until now, and there's probably, autopsies back in 2007 might be a little different than they are in 2026, and time has passed. I mean, how important is it that you get some of that evidence and revisit the case? I mean, how do you go about kind of building that case that has been very cold? And maybe we don't even know if they considered it a cold case until recently. I guess, how do you go about building that case?
We don't know what the autopsy report said in that case. We don't know, if it said accident. Just the term house fire would lend one to think that a death was an accident, right?
Right.
If it turns out that it was in fact arson, and that it also goes to say, we don't know if there was a full autopsy done, right? We can assume all day long. Maybe there wasn't. If they didn't suspect any sort of foul play and just thought, oh, this was a house fire, this guy died from smoke inhalation, or was burned to death, then there may not have been an autopsy. Now, I would be hard pressed to think that a prosecutor would bring this case unless there was, an autopsy report and a lot of physical evidence. But then you'd have to wonder, how was this evidence all preserved? Was it preserved? If it was a house fire, once the fire marshal said that, was it a situation where they didn't collect evidence, didn't go through the standard steps they would take if it was an arson investigation? We don't know the answer to any of that. So, and we don't want to assume at this point, but there are a lot of factors at play. So that case really would have a lot of moving parts, being so old, and, thinking that it was something just, an accident, like a house fire for so long. We just don't know at this point.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, to think of a case so old, 2007, you have this moment where you're like, oh my gosh, that was 20 years ago. Yeah. But when it comes to North Carolina being a death penalty state right now, she is accused of killing 2 people, trying to kill 2 more. How might the death penalty come into play at this?
Yeah, I think that, this is something where the prosecutors are likely considering it. I think there's a likely chance they will seek the death penalty. The area of the state where this happened is rural. It is very conservative, and the and juries there would be inclined. They would be more death prone than juries in some of the more liberal parts of the state, for sure.
How does the death penalty, because if she's facing really strong evidence, and if and when she gets an attorney, and if there's any sort of plea negotiations underway, some states have the death penalty, other states don't. How have you seen that card for a prosecutor saying, hey, we could take this off the table? I mean, how valuable is that card? Just not, making a comment on whether the death penalty should be legal or not, but like, just in those negotiations, I mean, how powerful of a tool is that for the prosecution?
It is very powerful leverage for the prosecution. Make no mistake. It's very powerful leverage. If the case and the evidence is extremely strong, that may be a place where the defense team is able to negotiate the most effective way for their client, to say that, hey, if she pleads guilty, the state will take the death penalty off the table, and she'll receive life without possibility of parole.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens next. Very much at the beginning of this case, the investigation, and more could be coming. Just a wild, wild story out of Western North Carolina. Kristen Halkiotis, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor from North Carolina. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I appreciate it.
All right, this is just a shocking case. A lot of questions unanswered still at this point. We're going to work to learn more. Casper-Leinenkugel is slated to be back in court for a probable cause hearing on February 10th. And again, she is being held currently in jail without bond. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. And now you can find episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.